You're of course well known also for your legal defense of the of what the rest of the world calls occupation of Israel's presence in Judea and Samaria. Could you briefly summarize what the why it is a legal right?
Well, the term occupation is a defined professional term in international law, and it means that State A is occupying the sovereign territory of State B. Israel is not occupying any sovereign territory. The West Bank or Judea and Samaria were never internationally acknowledged to be part of the sovereign state of Jordan, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, and the Gaza Strip was never even claimed by the Egyptians to be part of Egypt. Mm-hmm. And so it was never defined, and therefore the accepted definition of occupation can't be applied to Israel's situation in the West Bank. Add to that the fact that the historical and legal claims of the Jewish people from time immemorial, whether you see them in the Bible or whether you see them in historical explanations of the fact that there was a Jewish population here, even before the Common Era, Greek, Persian, Roman, all sorts of historians who visited the area, or whether you accept the archaeological evidence of the fact that directly connects the Jewish people to what happened during the time of the Bible, nobody can deny the fact that there are very basic rights here that aren't just the rights of an occupying power. They're far more basic. In Latin, we lawyers like to use Latin.
Yes.
It confuses our clients. It's called sui generis. In other words, it's a special situation that has no equal anywhere else, and therefore you can't label it as occupied territory. It's very special territory which has very special sources of rights of the Jewish people. We don't deny that the Arabs, that the Muslims might also have some type of rights, but they only arrived here in 700 after the Common Era, as they say, 700 AD. And we've been here since 1,600 before the Common Era. So our roots are far deeper, and therefore we've agreed to refer to it as disputed territory. And we've even signed an agreement with the Palestinian leadership that says that we're prepared to negotiate the permanent status of this territory. By negotiating, obviously you mean, if you negotiate, this give and take, sure, and you're prepared to compromise.
Okay. I'm just going to throw this out there. I'm going to see if because I'm trying to figure out exactly why the other side says occupation. And it seems to me, maybe I'm wrong, that the Geneva Conventions, since it's specifically about protection of civilians, so they're saying that the conventions themselves, or the protection provisions of the conventions themselves, should apply to the Palestinian Arabs because there's nothing else to protect them. There's no other legal mechanism to protect them. So therefore, once they say that that's happened, I think that ended up being conflated into saying this is therefore officially an occupation. I wanted to know.
Well, look, Israel doesn't deny the fact that it has committed itself to implement the humanitarian provisions of the Fourth Geneva Convention. Mm-hmm. Israel signed the Fourth Geneva Convention. We haven't applied it to the territory because the territory, as I said, it doesn't fall into the rubric of being occupied territory, and therefore, formally speaking, or theoretically speaking, the Fourth Geneva Convention doesn't apply there. But nevertheless, because it refers to the fact that there is a population, mm-hmm, and a population has rights.
Right.
And it's not just the Fourth Geneva Convention that was adopted after the Second World War in 1949, but there's the 1907 Hague Regulations, which deal with land war,
right,
and which deal with the status of land or status of territory during a period of warfare. And it says very clearly that the private rights to land or property in a territory which is under occupation or being administered have to be honoured.
Yes.
On the other hand, public rights that aren't private, for instance, if you have a tree, an apple tree, growing on land which is public, you can enjoy the fruits of the tree, you can eat the apples, but you can't destroy the tree because the whole question of what will be the outcome is subject to negotiation, and there might be a peaceful relationship, or territory might move from side to side. So as long as you don't destroy the tree, you can enjoy the apples. The same with land. Israel interprets this in modern day life as being that if there's public land that's not privately owned, we can enjoy the land, we can use the land, and we can build settlements and houses as long as this isn't permanent. In other words, I, as a resident of a settlement, I have a contract with the Israeli government which says that I have a 49-year lease. Mm-hmm. The land isn't registered in my name, it's registered in the name of the government of Israel. And the contract says that if, as a result of negotiations, this particular piece of land is going to be transferred to any other sovereign or other form of entity, then I have no rights there. I can claim compensation for the improvements that I've made by building a house, mm-hmm. but I can't claim anything for the land.
So that actually happens every time a person moves to Judea and Samaria. That's what the land deed says, that literally, yes. On it?
Except for those areas, for instance, in Hebron, which have always been owned by Jews, and, mm-hmm. and the Jews were thrown out by the Jordanians or killed. Right. So in such situations, and the original Ottoman land deeds still exist, mm-hmm. if it says that these lands belong to this family, so therefore they have complete and utter ownership. But what I'm saying is basically that we honour the private property rights of the local population. In other words, if an Israeli resident of the territories builds a house on land that's proven to be private Palestinian land, then the Supreme Court of Israel justifiably orders that the house be removed, or the settlement be vacated, or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I served as a member of a government commission, mm-hmm. Or it was not a government, it was appointed by the Prime Minister, but it was an independent commission of senior lawyers, mm-hmm. and judges. And we came to the conclusion that private land cannot be taken for settlement use, and anything like that has to be ended. But non-private land can be used, and therefore the automatic assumption by people like John Kerry and the European Union people that Israeli settlements are illegitimate is absolutely wrong. I even wrote a letter to John Kerry explaining it to him, a legal letter. Mm-hmm. Apart from an acknowledgement, I didn't get any else. Okay.
That's interesting, because the argument that I've heard for that has often been more that since the Geneva Convention specifically says that it's forbidden to transfer, and transfer implies forcible or against somebody's will. It doesn't say it exactly. And anybody that moves there voluntarily is not being transferred. So
this whole reliance on Article 49, yes. subparagraph 6 of the Geneva Convention, was put out in 1967 by the International Committee of the Red Cross,
yes.
which had an ulterior political motive. Yes. This provision, as I said, the 1949 Convention was drafted after the Second World War, mm-hmm. in order to deal with the issues that cropped up during that war.
Yes.
And one of the issues was the mass forced transfer of populations in Poland, in Czechoslovakia, in Hungary, all over Europe. Mm-hmm. And this provision, Article 49, was specifically intended to prohibit the type of forced movement of Germans from German territory into the territories that were occupied by Germany. Yes. It was never intended to refer to the type of settlement activity that Israel does, which is not forced, it's voluntary, but it's also not intended to change the demographic structure of a particular population. So it's really not relevant. And the official International Committee of the Red Cross commentaries, mm-hmm. on this article say so. Mm-hmm. They say specifically that this was intended for one thing.
Right.
what the Nazis did. It's not relevant to other things, and because it's become accepted parlance in the international community that Israel's settlements are illegitimate, that the territories are occupied. So everybody uses it without thinking. Let me just add another thing: the term Palestinian territories, occupied Palestinian. Where was it decided that these territories are Palestinian? Is there a Palestinian state? No. Has there ever been any legal determination, any binding resolution, any treaty or agreement or contract giving these lands to the Palestinians? No.
The closest thing, though, I obviously know what the arguments against it would be, is that in 1988 Jordan seemed to transfer whatever claim it had to the Palestinians.
But it didn't have a claim.
I know, right? Yeah.
I can transfer the royal palace in the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan to you.
Right.
But it doesn't mean that you have an ownership claim on it.
Sure.
Look, the fact that Jordan made this declaration doesn't mean anything. First of all, the fact that Jordan annexed this territory in Jerusalem and the West Bank in 1951, the Arab League came out against it. They say, "Why you're stealing land which is supposed to be an independent Arab state?" And so the Jordanians never really established themselves as a sovereign. And the fact that in 1988 King Hussein declared that he no longer has any territorial claims on it, he was freeing himself from baggage that was never really formally acknowledged. So, that's why I come back to the basic principle. We acknowledge the fact that this is a disputed territory. It's certainly not Palestinian. The Palestinians themselves have agreed in the Oslo Accords, which are still very much valid, that the permanent status of the territory has yet to be negotiated, as do settlements, as do the issue of refugees, and the issue of Jerusalem. So any determination by the UN that the territories are occupied Palestinian territories is nothing more than the wishful thinking of the majority of states adopting this or that particular resolution. It doesn't make law. It doesn't have any legal state.